You think the people holding all the power in this ruthless corporate world are the slick executives in tailored suits. Wrong. The person actually controlling your company's life support is usually sitting quietly in the corner. I let them laugh. I let them fire me after 8 years for wasting their money. They just did not realize the trash they tossed out was the only parachute on a plane nosediving straight into the ground. Hello, wonderful viewers of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating and paying our hardworking team. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment, so we can keep bringing you these thrilling tales. My name is Bella Brooks, and I am 34 years old. Or at least, I was 34 when the corporate axe finally fell. I held the lofty, utterly sterile title of Director of Human Systems Integration at Veridian Core Logistics. If you have ever driven on a highway near Chicago, you have undoubtedly seen our massive white trucks thundering past you. We were a colossal transportation and supply chain behemoth, the kind of operation that moved half the country's freight while blending perfectly into the background of your morning commute. But human systems integration was just a fancy management phrase. In reality, I ran training and safety compliance. For 8 grueling, coffee-fueled years, I built our crisis simulation and federal safety programs entirely from scratch. I designed the exact protocols that kept our massive rigs from turning into 60-ton steel missiles on the interstate. More importantly, my department was the invisible shield that kept the United States Department of Transportation from auditing us into absolute oblivion. We ran intense, highly specialized programs. We were the reason Veridian passed every single surprise inspection with flying colors. We were the reason our drivers went home to their families instead of becoming a tragic headline on the evening news. Then came the board of directors' brilliant idea to modernize. Enter Vance Sterling. Vance was a freshly minted chief executive officer imported straight from the heart of Silicon Valley. He was one of those arrogant tech bros who worshipped at the altar of artificial intelligence and total automation. To Vance, flesh and blood were just inefficient hardware. He fundamentally believed that human beings were the single variable responsible for every error, every delay, and every lost cent in his precious supply chain. Of course, a self-proclaimed visionary never travels alone. Vance brought his own loyal entourage of disruptors, leading with a guy named Julian Thorne. Julian was given the entirely made-up title of Vice President of Algorithmic Optimization. They wore designer sneakers to executive board meetings, drank ridiculously expensive green juices, and spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords. To them, my meticulously crafted safety programs were nothing but a prehistoric bottleneck. Julian actually had the nerve to stand in front of my senior staff during his first week, gesture vaguely at our training simulators, and call my department a corporate daycare meant to coddle obsolete drivers. The budget cuts began almost immediately. Vance and Julian were obsessed with shaving mere fractions of a second off delivery routes using their shiny new predictive algorithms. I watched our workplace culture turn incredibly toxic practically overnight. Crucial safety metrics, the very numbers that dictated mandatory rest periods and bad weather driving protocols, were suddenly being overwritten. They were blatantly ignored to make room for faster AI processing speeds and maximized profit margins. When a veteran driver complained about a highly dangerous route the new system forced him into during a blizzard, Julian just looked at him and told him to trust the math. It was sickening to witness. The company I had poured my 30s into was being dismantled by men who had never driven anything larger than a luxury electric sedan. Most people in my position would have screamed. They would have filed formal complaints with human resources or stormed into Vance's expansive glass-walled office demanding professional respect. But I knew better. In a corporate structure run by men who desperately need to be the smartest people in the room, raising your voice just makes you a visible target. I knew that fighting them openly would just hand them the excuse they needed to escort me off the premises. So, I did not fight them. I smiled at Julian in the break room when he made condescending remarks about my team. I nodded along politely during Vance's hour-long, mind-numbing monologues about the automated future of global logistics. But quietly, deep beneath the surface, I began to harvest. I set up highly secure, encrypted backdoors in the training department servers. Every single time Julian's algorithm bypassed a mandatory federal safety regulation to save a few minutes, I logged it. Every time Vance authorized a ruthless budget cut that blatantly violated the Department of Transportation compliance codes, I saved the memo and backed it up. I became a digital ghost in my own department. I was meticulously collecting the raw data of their unchecked arrogance. They truly thought they were building a flawless, untouchable machine. They did not realize I was silently documenting every single crack in their foundation, just waiting for the whole thing to inevitably shatter. The trap sprang shut barely a month later. It did not start with a dramatic confrontation, but with a seemingly harmless email announcing a hyper-agile structural audit. Julian Thorne and his optimization team descended upon my department like a swarm of digitized locusts. They did not come to understand what we did. They came with pre-configured spreadsheets designed specifically to distort our operational reality. Every preventative measure my team had built was reframed as corporate bloat. Julian weaponized the corporate lexicon against me. He threw around phrases like synergistic realignment, redundancy optimization, and legacy operational friction to describe programs that literally kept our drivers alive. But his ultimate target, the golden goose he needed to justify my crucifixion, was a specific line item in our third quarter budget. I had recently authorized an expenditure of $600,000. The money funded the development of a state-of-the-art virtual reality collision risk simulation software, tightly integrated with mandatory federal certification courses. To anyone with an ounce of industry experience, it was a vital investment that would save the company tens of millions of dollars in potential liabilities. To Julian, it was the ultimate waste for a humanless era. He submitted his findings on a Thursday. By Friday, my fate was sealed. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon on that Friday, a calendar invite appeared on my screen. The subject line read, Strategic Alignment Touch Base. Any veteran of the corporate world knows exactly what a 4:30 Friday meeting means. It is the coward's hour. It is the precise time executives choose for an execution because the week is over, the office is emptying out, and they can march you out the back door without causing a scene or damaging team morale. I walked into the executive suite with a perfectly calm heart. Vance Sterling was sitting behind his massive oak desk, steepling his fingers. Julian hovered over his shoulder like a loyal attack dog. There was no friendly banter. Vance did not even offer me a seat. Bella, Vance began, using his best patronizing, visionary voice. Viridian is rapidly pivoting toward a frictionless, fully automated paradigm. We are trimming the fat to achieve maximum algorithmic synergy. Unfortunately, your vision for this company is anchored in the past. He tossed a heavily redacted printout of Julian's audit across the desk. It landed right in front of me. Julian has brought some deeply concerning financial anomalies to my attention, Vance continued, his tone shifting from visionary to accusatory. Specifically, the $600,000 you funneled into virtual reality simulations for human drivers. You are aggressively misusing company funds for delusional, archaic projects. We are transitioning to a fully autonomous fleet. Bella, our new artificial intelligence interface does not get tired, it does not get distracted, and it certainly does not need your garbage safety training. Julian chimed in, adjusting his designer glasses. Your department is a statistical liability. Bella, we are simply eliminating the human variable. Your virtual reality project is essentially a $600,000 video game for an era that no longer requires human drivers. Therefore, Vance said, leaning forward to deliver the final blow, we are terminating your employment at Viridian Core Logistics, effective immediately. Human Resources has prepared a severance package. It is contingent on you signing a standard non-disclosure and non-compete agreement right now. If you refuse, we will withhold the severance and pursue legal action for the misappropriation of company funds. They expected me to beg. They expected me to cry, to defend my legacy, or to launch into a desperate rant about federal safety mandates. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the outdated human element break down in front of their superior, data-driven intellects. I did not give them a single drop of satisfaction. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at Vance, then at Julian, and let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. "Give me the pen," I said. Vance blinked, clearly entirely thrown off by my total lack of resistance. He slowly pushed a silver pen and a stack of legal documents across the desk. I did not even bother to read the fine print. I signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes, pushing the papers back toward him before the ink was even dry. I walked back to my office flanked by an anxious security guard. I did not pack any personal photos. I did not take my favorite coffee mug or the industry awards gathering dust on my shelf. I simply opened my desk drawer, pulled out one highly secured, thumb-sized encrypted hard drive, and slipped it into the pocket of my blazer. Vance was standing by the glass doors of the executive suite, watching me leave, probably wanting to ensure the trash was properly taken out. I stopped just inches from him before pushing through the exit. I looked him dead in the eye, dropping my voice to a whisper that only he could hear. "I hope your algorithm knows how to swim when the water rises." I walked out into the cool Chicago evening, leaving Vance staring after me, completely unaware that he had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. When executives look at a corporate ledger, they only see the raw numbers. They never bother to look at the architectural blueprints hidden behind those numbers. That $600,000 I supposedly wasted on virtual reality simulations. It was never just about training human drivers to put on headsets and practice avoiding swerving cars on a digital highway. The virtual reality software was merely a front, a beautifully disguised sandbox environment. What I was actually building, testing, and perfecting inside that digital sandbox was a highly complex, dynamic collision avoidance handshake protocol. I had reliable sources within the United States Department of Transportation. I knew they were quietly drafting a sweeping new federal mandate regarding autonomous commercial vehicles. Any automated truck operating on interstate highways would soon be legally required to possess an integrated safety override system, a protocol capable of instantly communicating with local infrastructure and overriding the driving algorithm during severe weather emergencies or mechanical failures. I knew this law was coming almost 18 months before Vance ever set foot in Chicago. I used the company's training funds to develop the exact regulatory protocol the federal government was about to demand, and I quietly patented the source code. But how does a mid-level director manage to personally own the intellectual property funded by a massive corporate conglomerate? The answer is incredibly simple. Arrogance and corporate greed are the most predictable blind spots in the world. When Vance first took over as chief executive officer, his primary obsession was not logistics, and it certainly was not artificial intelligence. His absolute obsession was making the quarterly tax burden disappear to justify his massive introductory bonus. Vance brought in an army of aggressive external accountants to relentlessly restructure our subsidiaries. These accountants realized that if they spun off the research and development wing of the training department into an independent, external entity, they could exploit a massive federal tax loophole designated for high-risk technological investments. Vance enthusiastically authorized the creation of an independent limited liability company. In his frantic rush to dodge millions of dollars in corporate taxes before the end of the fiscal year, he did not bother to read the dense legal articles of incorporation, because I was the sole developer, the department director, and the one holding the necessary federal safety certifications. I was legally required to be listed as the primary stakeholder and managing owner of that independent entity. Vance essentially handed me the irrevocable deed to the property just to save a few % on his quarterly tax return. Because this newly formed entity was technically classified as an external contractor, all the patents filed under it belonged entirely to me, not to Viridian Core Logistics. The intellectual property of that mandatory safety protocol was legally my personal asset. This was the multi-billion-dollar vulnerability Vance and Julian had completely overlooked in their ruthless crusade to eliminate the human element. Viridian's shiny new artificial intelligence could be the most technologically advanced system on the planet, but under the new federal laws, it could not legally roll a single tire onto a public highway without actively passing its decision-making matrix through my patented safety protocol. I owned the only toll booth on the only road leading to their automated future. They had fired the toll collector, but they forgot to check who actually owned the gate. A trap, no matter how brilliantly designed, is entirely useless if you do not have the right audience when it finally snaps shut. I needed powerful leverage inside the boardroom. I needed someone who could force an immediate vote when the time was right. I reached out to Marcus. Marcus was a veteran board member, a gruff, old-school logistics titan who had spent 35 years building Viridian from the ground up with his own hands. Vance and his Silicon Valley cronies had systematically pushed Marcus out of all strategic decisions, treating him like an obsolete dinosaur who simply could not grasp the modern world. I met Marcus at a quiet, rundown diner on the south side of Chicago, far away from the sleek corporate campus. I slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. It contained the patent registrations, the tax restructuring documents Vance had hastily signed, and the upcoming federal regulatory mandates. Marcus spent 45 minutes reading through the dense legal documents in total silence, occasionally sipping his black coffee. When he finally looked up, his eyes were practically gleaming with predatory anticipation. "He really signed this?" Marcus asked, his voice a low, disbelieving rumble. "Vance gave away the operational rights to our entire fleet just to claim a research deduction." "He did," I replied smoothly, "and in exactly 6 weeks, the Department of Transportation is going to make this specific protocol mandatory. Without my licensing agreement, Viridian's new autonomous fleet is effectively a multi-billion-dollar collection of giant paperweights." Marcus leaned back in his booth, a slow, dangerous smile forming on his face. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do." He agreed to become my proxy, perfectly positioning himself to strike from within the boardroom when Vance was most vulnerable. With Marcus securing the political flank, I turned my attention back to the technical front. The encrypted hard drive I had calmly carried out of my office was my secret window back into Viridian's internal network. From the quiet safety of my living room, I watched Julian's so-called flawless optimization algorithm begin to completely crack under the immense pressure of real-world variables. The internal deployment reports were an absolute disaster. In shadow testing, the artificial intelligence was routinely failing to recognize heavy rain, drastically miscalculating braking distances for fully loaded 70,000-pound trailers, and repeatedly ignoring local speed limits whenever the algorithms prioritized delivery speed over safety regulations. The error rates were catastrophic. If those trucks had been on real roads, people would have died. But the official reports Julian was submitting to the executive board painted a completely different, entirely fabricated picture. I watched in real time as he manually accessed the secure system logs in the middle of the night and scrubbed the error codes. He was permanently deleting the near misses. He was artificially lowering the risk percentages by manipulating the raw data. He was deliberately falsifying federal safety data to secure immediate approval for a nationwide rollout, fully aware that his algorithm was a ticking time bomb. Every single deleted log, every altered spreadsheet, every frantic, encrypted email Julian sent to his engineering team trying to patch the unfixable code. I downloaded all of it. I watched him dig his own grave, line of code by line of code. I had the legal snare. I had the powerful boardroom alliance. And now, I had the undeniable, meticulously documented proof of federal criminal fraud. The stage was perfectly set. Exactly 6 weeks after my swift exit from the glass-walled executive suite, the countdown clock reached its final hours. Vance Sterling was in New York City, preparing for the Q3 shareholder meeting. He had booked a lavish, sprawling ballroom in a 5-star Manhattan hotel for the event. This was supposed to be his crowning achievement. He was going to officially announce the immediate nationwide rollout of Viridian's fully autonomous fleet. He fully expected the stock price to absolutely skyrocket, securing his legacy as the ultimate corporate visionary of our decade. But while Vance was picking out his bespoke suit and rehearsing his charismatic talking points in front of a mirror, his entire digital empire was quietly burning to the ground back in Chicago. The new federal mandate had officially gone live precisely at midnight. The Department of Transportation had activated their automated checkpoint systems across the entire interstate network. Any autonomous commercial vehicle attempting to log a route manifest was now instantly pinged by the federal server, requesting a specific, encrypted handshake protocol to verify its safety override capabilities. It was the exact protocol my independent research entity legally owned. Inside Viridian's centralized data control room, utter chaos had erupted. The beta test trucks, which were scheduled to roll out onto the test tracks to provide live data for Vance's presentation, were completely paralyzed. Their dashboards flashed blinding red warning lights. The federal system had instantly locked the engine control units, citing a missing compliance code. They were effectively grounded by the United States government. Julian Thorne was in a state of absolute, dripping panic. I knew this because I was watching his frantic activity through my encrypted backdoor access. He was standing in the middle of the server room, his designer shirt completely soaked in sweat. For the first time in his arrogant life, his predictive math could not save him. The algorithm he worshipped was trapped behind a massive legal and technical wall that it simply could not compute. Desperation makes cornered executives do incredibly stupid things. Instead of picking up the phone and telling his chief executive officer the absolute truth that they lack the required intellectual property to operate, Julian decided to play God. He ordered his lead engineers to try and spoof the federal ping. "Just bypass the federal checkpoint," Julian screamed at a terrified junior developer, his voice echoing through my audio tap. "I do not care how you code it. Just force those dashboard lights to turn green before tomorrow morning." He commanded them to write a bypass script, essentially a piece of malicious malware, designed to trick the Department of Transportation servers into believing the trucks possessed the correct safety protocols. It was a spectacular, career-ending mistake. You do not just casually hack a federal safety database without setting off massive alarms. The government servers immediately recognized the clumsy spoofing attempt. Every single line of code Julian forced his team to inject left a permanent, blazing digital footprint. He was no longer just manipulating internal company metrics. He was actively committing federal cyber fraud against the United States government, and I was downloading every single keystroke of his crime in real time. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the felony unfolding in his own data center, Vance was floating on a cloud of his own hubris. Julian had sent him a brief, heavily sanitized text message claiming they had experienced a minor server latency issue that was now completely resolved. Vance, entirely technically illiterate and blindingly eager for his moment of glory, accepted the lie without a single question. He stepped up to the podium for his dress rehearsal, completely unaware that the billion-dollar company he was managing was currently standing on the razor-thin edge of a total federal shutdown. The dramatic irony was almost poetic. He was arranging the centerpieces while the ship was already entirely submerged. Back in my quiet Chicago apartment, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic hum of my laser printer. I was methodically turning Julian's digital panic into hard, undeniable physical evidence. I printed the raw error logs that proved the trucks were legally grounded. I printed the frantic chat transcripts and system commands where Julian ordered his team to spoof the federal database. I printed the undeniable proof of his forged safety metrics from the past month. And finally, I printed the pristine, legally binding intellectual property certificates that proved I was the sole owner of the very protocol they were desperately trying to steal. I organized every single sheet of paper into a thick, sleek black leather binder. It was not just a dossier. It was a perfectly constructed legal explosive. I packed a sharp charcoal suit into my carry-on bag. I slid the black binder into my briefcase alongside a piece of heavy cardstock that Marcus had overnighted to me. It was an executive proxy voting card, legally granting me the right to speak and cast votes on behalf of his substantial shareholder equity. I caught a late evening flight out of O'Hare International Airport, heading straight toward the heart of Manhattan. Looking out the small oval window at the dark clouds below, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Vance thought he was about to unveil a shiny new future to his investors. He did not know I was bringing the hammer that would smash his house of cards into a million unrecoverable pieces. The grand ballroom of the Manhattan Plaza Hotel was practically dripping with corporate opulence. At exactly 10 in the morning on a crisp Tuesday, the vast space was packed to the brim with hedge fund managers, institutional investors, and the entire executive board of Viridian Core Logistics. They sat comfortably in plush velvet chairs, sipping expensive sparkling water from crystal glasses, their eyes locked onto a massive, high-definition screen dominating the front wall. Standing center stage, bathed in the blinding glow of a theatrical spotlight, was Vance Sterling. He looked like the absolute picture of modern executive triumph. He was wearing a custom-tailored dark navy suit, pacing the wide stage with the practiced, arrogant ease of a man who believed he had just conquered the entire global transportation industry. Behind him, the massive screen displayed a dizzying, colorful array of line graphs and bar charts, projecting thousands of percentages of growth. The financial projections were entirely fictional, built on the fabricated data his tech team had desperately scraped together, but to the greedy eyes in the audience, they painted a picture of infinite, untouchable wealth. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, esteemed shareholders, and valued partners, Vance projected, his voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. We stand today at the absolute precipice of a global paradigm shift. For decades, the supply chain industry has been held hostage by the most unpredictable, inefficient, and remarkably expensive variable on the planet. I am talking, of course, about the human element, human error, human fatigue, human demands for compensation and safety coddling. Today, we definitively close the book on that obsolete era of doing business. The room erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Vance soaked it in, pausing to flash a predatory, bright white smile at the front row where the senior board members sat. Our new, fully integrated artificial intelligence fleet has passed every single internal deployment benchmark with absolute perfection, Vance lied, his voice dripping with utter certainty. We have achieved 100% route optimization. We have entirely eliminated the bloated necessity for legacy safety training protocols. We have effectively designed the perfect, tireless worker. Therefore, to fully realize this unprecedented profit margin and reward your faith in my vision, I am officially calling for a board vote today to approve Phase 3 of our structural realignment. This final phase will execute the immediate termination of our remaining 5,000 human drivers across the country, as well as the complete and permanent dissolution of the Compliance Oversight Division. Vance raised his hand, gesturing magnanimously toward the long mahogany table situated directly below the stage. Do I have a formal motion from the board to approve the mass layoffs and authorize the immediate nationwide deployment of our automated fleet? The chairman of the board, an intimidating older man with silver hair and a sharp, incredibly expensive gray suit, leaned forward toward his desktop microphone. I motion to approve the deployment and authorize the termination of... He never finished his sentence. At the exact back of the grand ballroom, the massive 20-foot-tall mahogany doors did not just open, they were shoved violently apart. The heavy wood slammed against the brass wall stoppers, with a sound like a literal gunshot echoing through a canyon. The entire room went completely dead silent. Every single head turned in unison. I stepped over the threshold into the light. I was not wearing the sensible, muted corporate blouses they were used to seeing me in during budget meetings. I wore a razor-sharp, heavily structured dark charcoal suit. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression entirely unreadable and carved from ice. I was not the discarded, humiliated mid-level manager they had unceremoniously dumped on a Friday afternoon 6 weeks ago. I was an executioner walking calmly into the courtyard. Flanking me immediately on my right was a severe-looking, broad-shouldered man in a meticulously pressed black suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He was a senior litigator from one of the most ruthless, feared corporate law firms in Chicago. "Security?" Vance barked from the stage, his polished, visionary veneer cracking violently for the very first time. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger toward the back of the enormous room. "Remove that woman immediately. She is a disgruntled former employee trespassing on a closed executive session. Grab her." Two massive security guards in dark suits immediately detached themselves from their posts along the walls. They marched aggressively down the center aisle, reaching their large hands out to grab my arms and physically drag me backward. I did not even break my steady stride. My lawyer simply stepped smoothly and rapidly in front of me. He raised his left hand while using his right hand to press a heavily stamped, intimidating legal document directly into the chest of the lead security guard, forcing the large man to stop dead in his tracks. "If you lay a single finger on my client, you will be violently and unlawfully obstructing an active federal investigation," my lawyer stated, his deep voice carrying clearly and menacingly across the entirely silent room. "My client is an independent federal safety inspector acting under the direct, sworn authority of the United States Department of Transportation. Furthermore, I am officially serving this immediate federal court injunction directly to the executive board of this corporation." The lawyer held the official document high in the air for the entire room of wealthy investors to see the bold federal seals. "By direct order of a federal judge in the district court," the lawyer continued, "Viridian Core Logistics is legally barred from deploying a single autonomous vehicle upon any public roadway within the United States of America, effective immediately." The security guards completely froze. Stepping back and looking frantically toward the stage for instruction, Vance looked like he had just been physically struck in the stomach with a baseball bat. His mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. The hundreds of wealthy investors in the audience began to murmur frantically, the noise rising like a swarm of angry bees. Dozens of people were already pulling out their phones as the terrifying phrase "federal injunction" echoed through the lavish space. I walked right past the paralyzed security team and continued my slow, deliberate march straight down the center aisle. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. I walked right up to the very front row, stopping mere inches away from the long mahogany table where the board of directors sat, frozen in stunned silence. Vance scrambled clumsily down the short stage stairs, his face turning a chaotic, furious shade of crimson. "What is the meaning of this?" Vance demanded, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical, incredibly unexecutive pitch. "You are completely insane. You have absolutely no legal authority here. This is a private shareholder meeting. You cannot just barge in here." I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick, heavy black binder I had assembled in my living room. I lifted it high and dropped it flat onto the polished mahogany table right in front of the board chairman. It landed with a heavy, incredibly satisfying thud that made the silver-haired man jump. "I have every single piece of authority in this room." "Vance," I said, my voice cold, steady, and amplified perfectly by the stunning acoustics of the ballroom. "I am not just here acting as a sworn federal inspector. I am here legally representing a massive portion of your operational equity." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer, pulled out Marcus's heavy cardstock proxy card, and slid it aggressively across the smooth table until it hit the chairman's microphone stand. "I hold the exclusive, irrevocable executive proxy voting rights for Marcus, giving me an active 22% voting stake in this exact meeting." The chairman stared down at the legally binding proxy card as if it were a highly venomous snake resting on his agenda notes. I turned my cold gaze entirely away from the panicking chief executive officer and looked directly into the eyes of the terrified board members. I did not raise my voice to match Vance's shouting. I spoke with the calm, terrifying, absolute certainty of a general who had already completely won the war before the battle even started. "The artificial intelligence system your chief executive officer is attempting to aggressively launch today is utterly useless," I announced to the entire room. Under the new federal transportation mandates that officially enacted at midnight last night, every single automated commercial truck must actively run its decision matrix through a specific, highly secure environmental safety override protocol. Your company does not possess that protocol. I reached out, slowly flipped open the cover of the black binder, and turned directly to the pristine intellectual property certificates. I tapped the heavy watermarked paper repeatedly with my index finger. You do not possess it, because I personally built it using the very training funds Vance accused me of wasting. Then, in his desperate, greedy, utterly blind rush to avoid paying your quarterly corporate taxes, your visionary leader forcibly restructured my department into an independent legal entity. He made me the sole managing owner. Therefore, gentlemen, I personally own the absolute legal copyright to the one and only safety protocol that can get your multi-billion-dollar fleet onto the highway. The murmurs in the room instantly escalated into outright, panicked shouts. Panic swept through the crowd as institutional investors began speed-dialing their brokers, frantically whispering orders to dump their Viridian stock before the news hit the public wire. Vance lunged forward toward the table, slamming both of his hands onto the mahogany surface. That is a complete lie. That is company property. You stole company funds to build that. I did exactly what you signed your own name to. Vance, I replied, my voice slicing through his pathetic panic like a surgical scalpel. The software you are about to launch today, the autonomous, billion-dollar future you just stood on that stage and promised these people, is my exclusive, untouchable legal property, and I am officially standing before this board to declare that I flatly refuse to license it to you. The explosion of realization that hit the room was a physically palpable force. The board of directors stared in absolute, unadulterated horror at the irrefutable documents resting in front of them. The sophisticated, flawless automated empire they had poured billions of dollars into was completely, entirely paralyzed. It was legally dead on arrival, and the man who had driven them straight into this devastating legal brick wall was standing right in front of them, sweating through his custom suit, while the woman he had treated like absolute garbage held the only key to their survival. Vance let out a primal, echoing roar that shattered the remaining silence in the ballroom. "I will sue you into oblivion," he screamed, his face a mask of pure, unhinged desperation. "That is corporate theft. I will have you locked in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." My attorney did not even blink. He calmly reached over the mahogany table, flipped the black binder open to a specific tab, and slid it directly under the chairman's nose. "My client stole nothing," the lawyer stated in a voice entirely devoid of emotion. "She simply managed the independent entity that your chief executive officer legally established. Right here is Vance Sterling's own authorized signature, willfully surrendering all corporate rights to the training division's research and development assets in exchange for a highly aggressive tax write-off." I turned my back on Vance entirely. I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pointed it at the massive screen dominating the stage. The fictional, skyrocketing profit charts vanished instantly. In their place, a terrifying series of internal spreadsheets and raw system logs illuminated the room. "While we are discussing federal penitentiaries," I projected my voice to reach the very last row of terrified shareholders, "let us look at what Vice President Julian Thorne has been doing to secure those beautiful projections." The screen scrolled rapidly through the damning evidence. "These are the actual, unedited failure rates of your automated fleet. You will notice the artificial intelligence repeatedly failing to recognize pedestrian crosswalks and drastically miscalculating stopping distances for fully loaded trailers. Now, look at the encrypted timestamps on the right side of the screen. That is Julian manually accessing the secure servers at 3 in the morning to permanently delete the near-miss collision data. He deliberately falsified mandatory federal safety submissions to hide the fact that cutting human training has turned your fleet into a massive, rolling liability." The board members turned visibly pale. The chairman clutched his chest, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the criminal exposure. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat against the table. Here is my absolutely non-negotiable ultimatum, I declared, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. You have a choice to make right this second. Either you immediately terminate Vance Sterling and Julian Thorne for cause, effectively offering them up to the federal authorities to shield this corporation from criminal prosecution, or I will walk out of this hotel and permanently license my safety protocol to your largest global competitor. You will go bankrupt before the next fiscal quarter even begins. It did not even take 3 minutes. The board of directors did not ask for a recess. They did not call for private counsel. Right there, under the blazing stage lights and the horrified gaze of hundreds of wealthy investors, the chairman slammed his fist onto the table and stripped Vance of every single ounce of his executive power. Vance was fired on the spot, stripped of his severance package, and unceremoniously ordered by security to leave the premises. Julian Thorne did not even get the chance to pack his desk back in Chicago. Heavy-handed hotel security officers grabbed him by the arms, dragging him and his encrypted laptop out through the kitchen service elevators. He was locked in a private room to await the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who were already en route to discuss his massive data fraud. 2 weeks later, the dust had completely settled. I walked back into the glass-walled executive suite at the Chicago headquarters, but this time, I was not standing on the visitor side of the massive oak desk. I walked around it and sat down in the heavy leather chair as the newly appointed interim chief executive officer. My very first official act was to reinstate the entire Human Systems Integration Division with triple its original budget. Vance and Julian learned the hardest lesson the corporate world has to offer. They thought understanding human nature and building preventative safety nets was just a financial waste. They never realized that in a world obsessed with mindless machines, the person who understands the human element is the one who ultimately controls the entire board. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found this corporate revenge tale satisfying, please consider helping our channel out with just a $1 donation. You can scan the quick response code on your screen or use the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your support directly pays our incredibly hardworking team, allowing them to feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you to enjoy. Have a wonderful day.